Ghosts N Goblins flew straight out of hell and onto your NES back in 1986. Developed by Micronix and published by Capcom, Ghosts N Goblins was yet another in a long line of Capcom NES games that started out as an arcade release, where it quickly drew attention for not only its unique horror medieval aesthetic, but also because of the sheer amount of quarters it could quickly eat if anyone wanted to try to get very far in it at all. The arcade release was mostly exactly what we'd end up with on the NES, with you playing as the now iconic Arthur, as he fights his way through 7 stages filled with tons of the undead and demons standing in his way. The arcade release was definitely one of Capcom's more popular games at the time, and was pretty much a no-brainer to port onto the still brand new NES, hoping to bring the game to an audience that, at the time, couldn't get enough of playing their favorite arcade games right on their home TV sets. But did Ghosts N Goblins bring all of the fun of the arcade in tow, or is this one of those early NES arcade ports that should be laid to rest in the nearest cemetery? Well, suit up with your favorite coat of arms, because we're about to see if Ghosts N Goblins is still worth going to hell and back, and then back again for. Start up the game and you'll get a super brief cutscene where Arthur and Guinevere are on a particularly steamy date in the middle of a cemetery, only to be interrupted by a devil that steals Arthur's woman away. Shocked at the idea that his date in a haunted cemetery probably wasn't the best idea, Arthur quickly puts his armor back on, and then it's off to destroy the legion of demons in his way to get Guinevere back. And just like in the arcade, Arthur does this by running left and right, jumping and throwing his weapon at whatever's in front of him, which is mostly a selection of enemies that enjoy either walking back and forth or flying around the screen like some sort of deranged insect. Making your way through each of the game's 7 levels will require a mix of fast reflexes and luck, as every one of them will throw out a variety of platforming sections for you to navigate around, complete with all of those super cool bottomless pits and blind jumps that everyone seems to love. At the end of each stage, you'll fight a boss that's standing in your way, and if you can make it past them, then it's on to the next level as you inch closer and closer to finding Guinevere. Thankfully, you're not left to fend for yourself without some help, as the game does at least give you a decent number of weapons that drop during the game, like fireballs and axes, to help you along your journey. You also get a selection of items that can both aid and hurt you that drop throughout the game, like adding or subtracting to the stage time, extra armor, and those always useful bonus lives. And that's really about it as far as gameplay goes. Ghosts N Goblins certainly isn't trying to be anything more than a basic action platformer. And if you're thinking that all this sounds like a fun little NES game to blast through in an afternoon, well, you may want to make it through the rest of this video before you attempt it. Of course, all of this is fairly standard for just about any NES platformer, and if it ended there, then Ghosts N Goblins would probably be a lot less notorious. Unfortunately, that's not where things end, and as you all probably already know, Ghosts N Goblins is mostly known for its legendary difficulty, a difficulty that starts punishing you almost as soon as you press start, and doesn't ever let up until you either beat the game or kick your NES across the room from sheer frustration. It all stems from a combination of technical issues, awful items and weapons, and an absolutely staggering amount of cheap enemies and patterns that all meld together to form the perfect nightmare of a game. First up in that nightmare are the weapons. As mentioned before, the game does at least have a decent variety of weapons that drop for you to use that, in theory, should even the playing field a bit. Unfortunately, most of those weapon pickups are actually much worse than your default lance, with only the dagger being a worthwhile upgrade. In fact, a good majority of the weapons seem to put you at a severe disadvantage as soon as you pick them up, like the axe that you throw in an arc that's maybe useful once in the entire game, or the fireball, which will continue to burn if it hits the ground, preventing you from throwing out any more attacks until it completely burns away. The dagger actually ends up being by far the best weapon in the game, simply because you can throw it at a much faster rate than the other weapons. So even if you do miss an enemy, it'll generally fly off the screen fast enough that it won't hinder your ability to continue to attack, like how the fireball and other slower weapons do. As a result, this is definitely one of those games where you'll probably be avoiding weapon drops more than actually picking them up, except for when the game just puts one directly in your path, basically forcing you to pick up a weapon that essentially handicaps you until something better hopefully drops. Other items in the game are mostly useless as well, since the ones that can actually help you, like extra armor, drop so rarely that it may as well not even exist. And then there are also a variety of weapons that will actually somehow make the game harder for you, like items that decrease the time you have to finish the stage, or a wizard that appears and turns you into a frog that can only hop around the stage until you're inevitably killed, which is always super fun. And even with all of this, the game could have still been pretty fun, if not for some of the cheapest enemy placement and patterns ever seen in a video game. Every stage is filled to the brim with enemies that either love flying straight at you or cornering you with no escape. And for a game that only allows you to take 2 hits before you die, well, you probably already see how this is gonna go. I'm seriously not lying to you at all when I say that attempting to beat this dragon boss got me so angry that I actually took my socks off in a fit of rage. I have no idea why I took my socks off, but that's just what Ghosts N Goblins does to you. It just makes you insane. And the rest of the game isn't much better, including this section in stage 2 that has you scaling a building with enemies that take way too many hits to kill and is so impossible that I couldn't stop laughing at one point because I was too angry to scream anymore. And when I finally did get past it, I wasn't even sure how I managed it. This is because progressing in Ghosts N Goblins just, for the most part, feels like you do it by accident, with no real idea of what you did different to reliably make it through that section of the game again because the difficulty can seem so random at times. Maybe there are some people out there that actually enjoy this kind of torture, but for me, it's just not fun to get this mad at a video game. And all of this isn't even mentioning the game's technical issues, with janky scrolling and flickering enemies making everything just that much worse. All of this combined basically sucks out any of the fun that Ghosts N Goblins could have ever provided, unless you're just one of those people that enjoy this type of challenge. At the end of the day, despite its insane difficulty and other issues, Ghosts N Goblins is still one of those games that's remembered fairly fondly, judging by the sheer amount of collections and consoles it continues to get re-released for. Though I genuinely wonder just how much of that is based on sheer nostalgia alone, rather than actually wanting to sit down and play through it these days. I can only offer up my own experience with the game, since I was also one of those kids that absolutely loved Ghosts N Goblins back in the day. And I've got some great memories renting it from the grocery store by where I used to live. Hell, I went into this review expecting to relive a lot of those memories with an awesome game that I fondly remember. Instead, I came away wishing I'd never ruined it all by realizing just how badly this game has aged. It doesn't run well, and the weapons are god-awful, and difficulty is somewhere between mental torture and an actual crime against humanity. So no, I don't recommend revisiting Ghosts N Goblins this Halloween, since the only raging monster the game will provide will be the one it ultimately turns you into. Boogerman overflowed out of a filthy gas station toilet and onto your Sega Genesis back in 1994. Developed and published by Interplay, Boogerman was yet another entry into the seemingly endless platform mascot genre that had been in full effect since the late 80s. Knowing this, Interplay decided to make Boogerman stand out from the crowd by giving him the gimmick of being super gross, if you hadn't already figured that out from a game called Boogerman. And you may be asking yourself, just why would anyone want to make that a selling point? Well, keep in mind that this was back at a time when being over-the-top gross was the high point of kids' entertainment, with the likes of Ren and Stimpy regularly making parents wish that they could put their kids up for adoption every time it came on TV. So with kids' TV infested with exploding eyeballs and jokes centered around pus, enter Boogerman to try his hand at cornering the console gross-out market with attacks centered around bodily function and his constant exclamation of "Booger!" as his catchphrase that no doubt sent kids everywhere under 10 into cardiac arrest due to the sheer hilarity of it all. But despite the whole fart and booger-laden gimmicks, did Boogerman actually somehow have a fun game underneath it all? Or was this the 786,000th platform mascot game to hit the Kmart clearance bin in less than a month? Well, strap your favorite underwear around your head and maybe try not to let anyone see you do that, since they might actually institutionalize you, because we're about to see if Boogerman stinks as much as it wants you to think it does. Once you're done asking yourself what you've done with your life up to this point to be playing a game called Boogerman, then it's time to play Boogerman. Get into the game and you're met with Boogerman himself, who essentially looks like a combination of someone from the People of Walmart website and a superhero that's put in the least amount of effort into being a superhero. Essentially, Boogerman is here because of some sort of science experiment gone wrong, when all of the world's trash is being sent to a separate dimension or something. Everyone's favorite gross janitor accidentally stumbles into this one night and sets off to see who or what could be behind things in this weird trash world. And that's where you take control of Boogerman, with his incredible superpowers consisting of tossing boogers, belching, and of course farting to take down anything in his way. A trio of superpowers that, while disgusting, are sadly far more relatable than other superheroes out there right now, at least to me anyway. Making your way around Boogerman should be familiar to anyone that's ever played a platform game in their life, as Boogerman runs, jumps, and climbs his way through 20 levels filled with enemies based on, you guessed it, disgusting bodily functions missions, like nose goblins and exploding pus monsters. Though I actually ended up finding this disturbing tree face that keeps repeating in the first few levels to be by far the most disgusting thing in the game. It just kind of haunts my dreams now. Most of the stages are fairly straightforward, with you just needing to get to the end of the stage to progress, so don't expect any puzzle solving or junk like that, because it should be pretty obvious that Boogerman probably wouldn't excel at such a thing. Some of the stages can be a bit long though, and with Boogerman only able to take 2 hits before he melts away, you'll need to quickly become a master in the art of digestive kung fu. The belch and fart attacks can be powered up to take down larger enemies and barriers throughout the stage, though neither of these attacks are much better than just flinging your boogers everywhere. Especially the fart attack, since you actually have to turn Boogerman around to aim his ass at things. God, I can't believe I'm actually saying any of this. Unfortunately, you can't just go around belching and farting as much as you want though, as you have a limited supply of both snot and gas, so keep an eye out for refills on both throughout the stages, or you'll just be stuck trying to jump on top of enemies, which isn't exactly ideal or anywhere near as hilarious. At the end of every world, you get treated to a boss to take down, all of which rely on the exact same attack pattern of throwing something at you, jumping across the screen, and then repeating. Most are at least fairly creative and live up to their disgusting worlds, like Flyboy, who pukes maggots and acid at you from across the screen. Some of the bosses can be a bit tricky since some of their attacks give you almost 0 time to react, but with a little memorization and infinite continues, you should be able to take them down after a few tries. Besides the bosses, Boogerman isn't exactly overly challenging if you take your time, though the game definitely loves to place enemies in some pretty cheap spots at times, along with Boogerman just overall having a weird hit detection, which can cause you to take a hit when you thought you weren't even being touched. Especially with smaller enemies like these bouncing things that'll just torment you constantly throughout the game, since they're both incredibly hard to hit with your boogers, and jumping on them is a complete gamble if you'll take a hit or not. As mentioned, with 20 levels to beat, there's a good amount of game to play through here. It's just a matter of how much Boogerman and his constant voice clips you can stand before you realize you've had enough. When Boogerman hit store shelves, it came toward the tail end of a landslide of platform mascot games that had pretty much flooded every console on the market at the time. So in my case at least, I had grown pretty tired and cynical of any mascot game that didn't have Mario or Sonic plastered on the front of it, simply because most of these games by this point were cheap, fast cash-ins to get dumb kids like me to spend money on them and then instantly regret it. And upon seeing a game called Boogerman on the store shelf, my 12-year-old eyes nearly rolled out of my head, since this just looked like the cheapest of cash-ins on the whole being gross fad that was popular with kids at the time. So when we got multiple requests to cover this game on the channel, I can't say I was too excited to do it. But after playing the game and actually giving it a fair shot, I can't say I hated it. No, it's not gonna win any awards of any sort, but I was actually surprised at just how likable Boogerman as a game, and not as a character, is. Even if you're not into the whole gross out thing, there's a lot to enjoy here, not the least of which is the game's incredible animation that really gives Boogerman a cartoon-like vibe in the same vein as something like Earthworm Jim. Now, I'm not going to put Boogerman on the same level as Shiny's masterpiece, and it definitely has its fair share of problems, but Boogerman is at least a solid game that I could actually recommend to someone without being too embarrassed by it. So if you're like me and maybe never gave this Boogerman guy the time of day since it looked like it came straight out of a focus group aimed at 6-year-old kids that like fart noises, then maybe toss this one in your Genesis if you ever get the chance, instead of the toilet. Battletoads and Battlemaniacs brought everyone's favorite space frogs onto your Super NES back in 1993. Developed by Rare and published by Tradewest, Battlemaniacs is the sequel to the incredibly popular Battletoads that was originally released a couple of years prior on the NES. The original game was well liked by most kids, even if almost none of us ever made it past the 3rd stage due to its extreme difficulty. Still, it looked great and played well, and even let you play with 2 players at the same time if you had a penchant for wanting to torture your friends by making the game even harder than it already was. And even though Battletoads sold well, no immediate follow-up was announced the next year, which left us kids wondering if Tradewest had just tossed these toads into a shallow pond. But as 1993 rolled around, we got not 1, not 2, but 3 brand new Battletoads games in the same year. The Game Boy game was just more or less a port of the NES game to the Game Boy, which was still Toad-tacular for us kids wanting some Battletoads on the go. The other NES and Super NES games saw the Battletoads teaming up with the Libra brothers in Battletoads vs. Double Dragon, which did a great job of mixing the two franchises together in a pretty fun brawler. And while both of those games are worth talking about more, the one we're focusing on today is the one that generated the most excitement for Battletoads fans like me, as it was the actual heir apparent to the NES original, and also the first real Battletoads game released on the insanely popular Super NES. With Rare back at the helm and Nintendo Power gushing about the game before its release, Battletoads fans couldn't wait to get their hands on the next big thing from Rare. But did Battlemaniacs live up to the hype and become the definitive Battletoads experience? Or were these toads rushed out the door for a disappointing sequel that couldn't live up to the original? Well, get on your favorite hover bike because we're about to see if Battlemaniacs ended up being a toad load of fun. Just like the original NES game, you start off Battlemaniacs playing a fairly standard-looking brawler, as your toad can run around the screen and bust up some pork by using your comically exaggerated moves, like your fists turning into a massive hammer, or growing huge ram horns whenever you dash attack someone. Making your way through the stage is all about killing waves of evil pigs and skeletons, while dodging a few obstacles like an erupting volcano until you make it to the boss, which just happens to be one incredibly stoned pig. This giant porker wants nothing more than to flatten you with his jumping attacks, which are all easily dodged, allowing you to smash him a few times with your fist when he hits the ground. Overall, the first stage here is a fun callback to the NES original, but if you're expecting the rest of the game just to be more of this, well, you probably haven't played a Battletoads game before. Stage 2 sees you on a hoverboard, slowly drifting your way down a massive tree trunk, which is again pretty much what you did in Stage 2 of the NES game, just minus the hoverboard. You can move that hoverboard around the screen to attack enemies and dodge stuff like fans that blow you into spikes or rats with magnets that try to pull you over and knock you off your hoverboard. Being careful though and paying attention to your surroundings will get you through the majority of this level, but the game decides to go full-on asshole at the very end as it sends you screaming down a very narrow passageway with almost no room to maneuver around the huge spikes on each side of you. This is officially where Battlemaniacs decides to let everyone know that not only did it bring back a lot of the NES's game stages and ideas with it, but it also brought along the same incredibly unforgiving difficulty. And as you'd expect, one wrong move here is basically instant death. And before you know it, you'll be at the continue screen to do the entire thing over from the beginning in the hope that you can somehow, this time, make it through this frustrating tunnel of pain. If you can do this enough times to memorize it, or just manage to get lucky with the odd hit detection, then congratulations! You've made it to the level that's given everyone that's ever played a Battletoads game PTSD, and that's the hoverbike stage. Yes, if you didn't see a pattern already, then it shouldn't be a shock to you that Stage 3 of Battlemaniacs has brought back everyone's favorite Battletoads stage for the sequel. Thankfully, at least the hoverbike stage in Battlemaniacs isn't quite up to the sheer madness of the NES game, but it'll still push you to the edge of sanity as you run into wall after wall because of the odd perspective or just sluggish jumping. There's a total of 4 sections to make it through here, which all thankfully count as checkpoints if you die during one of them, which you definitely will. And just like the end of the last stage, be ready to use up all of those lives and continues until you either manage to memorize every single obstacle or just do what most people do that's ever played a Battletoads game at this stage and turn the game off in a fit of rage and swear to never play it again. But let's say you somehow do manage to make it past the hoverbike stage, and you're hoping that maybe Battlemaniacs will have mercy on you by giving you something a bit easier for Stage 4. Well, as soon as you see yourself riding on the back of a giant snake and jumping over spike traps with zero room for error, then you know that Battlemaniacs has instead found another layer of memorization hell for you to master. Yes, the notorious snake level from the first Battletoads makes its triumphant return here, and if you didn't think Rare was gonna bring this one back to haunt your dreams again, then you only have yourself to blame. It's still just as impossible as it was in the first game, only somehow made even more ridiculous, since this is a Super NES game and all the characters have to be way larger than the tiny toads you played as on the NES. The side effect of this is that you can only see about 10 feet in front of wherever the snake's taking you, giving you almost zero time to react to obstacles, or many times not even being able to see where the snake's going. Any death will, of course, send you back to the beginning of one of the 3 sections that you'll need to make it through, with the last being an ice section that forces you to use your inertia on the ice to slide past a few of the obstacles. levels, one of which is the exit to the level, making you jump off the snake fast enough to carry yourself underneath a couple of spikes and through the door. But if you don't have enough inertia, or you didn't see that you needed to jump in time, then you're basically just stuck sitting underneath these spikes inches from the end of the level. And all you can do is stand up and die instantly just so you can do the whole section over again. And that's if you have any lives or continues left at this point, which you probably don't, because this game wants to crush your soul as often as it can. Making it to stage 5 can either be seen as a triumph or a curse, since you just know that Battlemaniacs is going to find a new and exciting way to torture you, and it does so with yet another stage built around memorizing every single button press. This time, Battlemaniacs brings back yet another NES level as you race around a track hanging onto handlebars that are attached to a rail. All you really have to do is press in the direction that you're going and occasionally jump over a pit or ducking underneath a hazard. That all sounds simple enough until you realize that you're being chased by a rat with a giant saw blade that will instantly kill you if he catches up with you. And it should go without saying that the rat is faster than you are, and the only way you can gain distance on him is to time your button presses perfectly as you go around each corner. And once again, it's all about memorizing each and every screen, since a few slip-ups around the corners or running into a hazard will send you back to the beginning of the stage. It's at least fairly short in length, but you'll still probably have to end up playing it several times just to gain enough distance to make it to the end and not get sliced in half. But if you can manage it, then congratulations, because you've actually made it to the final level. Battlemaniacs closes things out as you descend a massive tower, fighting your way through a few enemies and dodging the various stuff that's being shot at you along the way down. Now, you may be thinking that this seems a little bit easier than what the other stages have been so far, and you'd be right. At least until the level suddenly explodes for no reason and you're back at the beginning. So what happened? Well, surprise, surprise, much like a stage from the first Battletoads, a rat appears at the top of the screen, which you just have to easily dodge to be done with as he goes off the bottom of the screen. But if you do that, then you've already lost. What you're supposed to do is race the rat to get to the bottom before he does and blows the tower up. So you'll need to drop down the tower as fast as possible while occasionally punching the rat to the side to slow him down. And I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I actually enjoyed this part. It's not just the rigid memorization that most of the game has been up to this point, and actually gives you a little room to screw up or push the rat back if he gets too close. Of course, you've got to do it 3 times to beat the stage, with each section getting trickier and trickier, but overall it was probably one of the more enjoyable stages in a game that really hasn't offered up anything much at this point besides seething anger. Make it to the bottom of the tower and you face off with the queen herself in a boss battle that has you jumping over her one projectile attack as she warps around the room. Now, compared to the difficulty of the rest of the game, the queen comes off more as baby's first video game boss here, as there's literally no challenge to it besides just timing your jumps over her attack so that you can hit her before she teleports away. But after what you just went through to get to her, I doubt anyone's complaining that this is maybe a little bit too easy. Smash the queen enough and she'll run off, meaning you've actually beat the game, which is kind of weird since the original Battletoads game had twice as many stages as this one does. This is supposed to be the big Super NES sequel here, but it feels half finished, since not only is it short, but it literally used the same stages from the first game, just with a new coat of paint on them. Well, it's not like anyone ever beat this game anyway, so I guess that's a moot point. Battletoads for the NES was always one of those games people either loved or hated due to its incredibly ridiculous difficulty, and Battlemaniacs is no different. Personally, I always really liked the original Battletoads. Even though I generally never get too far in it, I always at least enjoyed playing it, and it didn't hurt and it looked and sounded terrific for an NES game. So in theory, Battlemaniacs should be just as enjoyable, since it basically takes the original game and blows it up on the Super NES with even better graphics and sound. But for some reason, Battlemaniacs just never hit home with me in the same way. For one, I think the game actually somehow looks worse than the NES game, with a darker, more comic book look to it that didn't grab me like its bright, cartoonish predecessor did. And as mentioned before, those big characters sure do look cool, but it also made sections of the game way harder than they should have been simply because you can't see around as much. I don't know guys, I'm sure I'll be sacrificed for this, but I just never really cared too much for Battlemaniacs. And if given an option out of all of the Battletoads games out there, I'd probably actually put Battlemaniacs dead last. I just don't think it's very fun, and the NES game did everything this one does, just better. So yeah, in the end, if someone wants to get into Battletoads these days, this probably isn't the game I'd point to get started with. I'm sure a lot of people love this one, but it's just never done anything for me besides making me wish I was playing the NES original. But if you're already a Battletoads fan and somehow missed out on this one, then Battlemaniacs may still be worth checking out, warts and all.